Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. We're continuing our study of Leviticus, and today we're looking at Leviticus 11 through 15. This is the section of the book that deals with ritual purity. Now, ritual purity is something very foreign to us, and so it's a little bit difficult to understand, but this pandemic has actually put us in a position to understand it better. So I'm filming from home right now because we have a COVID outbreak on our campus. We're up to 16 positive cases and 61 people in quarantine. So I think everybody in our world today is thinking about germs. And if we think of ritual impurity kind of like a spiritual germ, I think it can help us. Germs are something we can't see, but they can make us very sick. When the Bible talks about ritual impurity, it's kind of like today when we say somebody's been exposed to a positive case of COVID and now they need to isolate because if they come in contact with others, then they could spread the disease to others. So we're not thinking of moral problems here. We're thinking of a spiritual ritual impurity. And we don't think like this anymore, but again, I hope the pandemic helps us a little bit in making sense of this. So in Leviticus 11 through 15, we have 6 separate speeches, each of which deals with a different type of ritual impurity. So in Leviticus 11, we have the first speech, and it has to do with what they eat. It details which sources of protein are unclean. That is, the Israelites should not eat them at any time. The second speech is in Leviticus 12, and it deals with the uncleanness that results from childbirth. Now, many people come to this chapter and feel very troubled because the length of time that a woman is impure is twice as long if she's given birth to a female as to a male. Why is that? Well, I'm not entirely sure, but the best explanation that I've heard is that a female baby carries within her the possibility of obviously when she grows and becomes mature, of giving birth herself, so that the length of time it takes to be cleansed from impurity, from this ritual impurity, is twice as long because there are two life-giving women involved. Whereas if a boy is born, it's just the mother's impurity that is a concern. The third speech is in Leviticus 13, and it deals with skin diseases and moldy fabric. Who knew that the status of your skin or of your fabrics would render you impure so that you couldn't come into God's presence? The fourth speech is in Leviticus 14, the first half of the chapter, and it's the restoration ceremony that is required for a person who has had a skin disease and needs to be reinstated. Note, in this ceremony, there is a place where they sprinkle and daub blood on the right earlobe and the right thumb and the right big toe of the person who's being reinstated. Why do they do this? I think the reason why is because every Israelite is a member of the kingdom of priests. We learned in Exodus 19 verse 5 that they are a kingdom of priests. And so if somebody becomes ritually impure, they're not able to function as priests. Like personally, they cannot function in this way. And so this is a symbol, an acknowledgement. The sprinkling of blood and daubing of blood acknowledges that the person is now being reinstated to their priestly role. The fifth speech is in Leviticus 14, the second half of the chapter, and it deals with molds in houses. Obviously, this is not something they have to deal with in the wilderness, so this is anticipating once they get into the land of Canaan and they have houses. If there are molds in their house, they have to be inspected by the priest. So the priests become building inspectors. And then in chapter 15, we have our sixth speech, which has to do with bodily discharges. Now, it's worth noting that there are some kinds of bodily discharges that do not make someone unclean, like a runny nose, or just mucus in general, or if you cut yourself and you're bleeding, that blood does not make you unclean. The types of bodily discharges that make you unclean are only those that have to do with fertility. So we have menstrual blood in the case of women and semen in the case of men. Those are the only bodily discharges that make someone unclean. This chapter is arranged in a sort of mini chiasm, first with 2 things that have to do with men, so an abnormal discharge and then a normal discharge. And then we have 2 things that have to do with women, a normal discharge and then an abnormal discharge. So we have abnormal, normal, normal, abnormal. with men's issues being dealt with first and then women's issues. And in verse 31 of chapter 15, we get the explanation for why all of this matters. Why does God care so much about ritual impurity? It says, so they will not die in their uncleanness for defiling my dwelling place, which is among them. None of this would matter if God didn't live in the neighborhood. But because God has chosen to live among his people, there's sacred space right in their midst, and they have to be very careful how they approach that sacred space. I think our takeaway is from these chapters should be that impurity is unavoidable. Everybody is impure at some time or another. Just like germs are unavoidable, we can't completely avoid them. But God wants people to understand how to properly handle their impurity so that his presence among them is not dangerous. Understanding this Old Testament system of ritual purity also helps us understand certain New Testament passages. For example, in Matthew chapter 8, Jesus comes across a man who has leprosy or a certain skin disease. This man comes and kneels before him and says, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. He doesn't say you can heal me. He says you can make me clean, because his leprosy is rendering him impure, unclean from the standpoint of ritual purity. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. This is remarkable because we've learned in these chapters, if you read them carefully, that anything that touches something unclean becomes unclean. But Jesus reaches out and touches someone who's unclean, and he becomes clean. So this is showing us Jesus' extraordinary power for cleansing. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. I am willing, he said, be clean. Immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy. Then Jesus said to him, see that you don't tell anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them. So Jesus is actually asking this man to obey the instructions that we find in the book of Leviticus for what to do after you have a skin disease and it goes away. You have to go and show yourself to the priest and bring an offering, and that's what Jesus asks him to do. He is upholding the Levitical system. Now, the Old Testament priests could inspect leprosy, but they couldn't heal it. In Numbers chapter 12, we hear a story about Miriam contracting leprosy because of her sin. And Aaron is helpless in the face of her leprosy. He can't do anything about it. He can see that she's unclean, but he can't heal her. So he brings her to Moses, and Moses prays for her, and she is healed. Moses has the authority to heal her that Aaron lacks. So the priesthood is important. It's an essential service. It lacks the ultimate authority of God's representatives. I hope this has been helpful in trying to crack the code of ritual impurity in the Old Testament. I highly recommend the Bible Project videos on this subject. There's one on holiness, and the videos on Leviticus are also really helpful in just trying to help us wrap our minds around a system that is cross-cultural and foreign to us. I hope it's been helpful. Keep digging into the Torah. We have so much to learn, and have a great week.